the philosopher who exposed the emptiness of modern life, Kierkegaard. Imagine living in a time before smartphones, social media, or constant noise, and yet still feeling completely lost inside. Now imagine being the only one brave enough to say out loud what everyone else was trying to ignore, that modern life, with all its comforts and distractions, is deeply hollow. This was the mission and the burden of Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher who dared to confront the most painful truth of all, that in our rush to fit in, to be efficient, to succeed, we've forgotten what it means to be truly alive. Before the world knew what existential crisis even meant, Kierkegaard lived one, and instead of running from it, he turned it into a philosophy so raw, so honest, that it still shakes people to the core today. In this video, we're going to explore how Kierkegaard exposed the spiritual emptiness behind modern life, what his most powerful revelations were, and how his message might be exactly what you need to hear right now, especially if you've been feeling disconnected, restless, or like something essential is missing. Before we begin, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because this isn't just a history lesson. It's a mirror, and by the end of this video, you may never see yourself the same way again. Topic 1. Kierkegaard's inner crisis and the roots of modern despair. Søren Kierkegaard was born in 1813 in Copenhagen, Denmark, into a wealthy yet somber family. From the outside, his life appeared privileged. He had access to education, philosophy, theology, and literature from an early age. But behind this surface, he grew up under the shadow of a deeply religious and melancholic father who believed their family was cursed. This heavy spiritual atmosphere shaped Kierkegaard's soul and laid the groundwork for the existential questions that would define his life's work. Even as a young man, Kierkegaard was different. He was introspective, solitary, and drawn to the mysteries of existence. While others chased careers and comfort, he asked questions that made people uncomfortable. Why do we exist? Why does life feel so absurd? And why does modern society seem to offer everything except meaning? These weren't abstract thoughts for him. They were personal. Kierkegaard wrestled with deep anxiety, spiritual dread, and the constant fear that he was wasting his one life. This inner storm intensified after a traumatic breakup with his fiancée, Regine Olsen. To most, it seemed like a simple failed engagement. But for Kierkegaard, it was a moment of crisis, one that pushed him to confront the terrifying idea that real love, truth, and meaning require sacrifice, isolation, and profound personal responsibility. He walked away from marriage not because he didn't love Regine, but because he felt unworthy of love until he understood himself completely. This radical honesty became the core of his philosophy. What Kierkegaard discovered in his crisis is something many still ignore today, that modern life gives us comfort, but not connection. Distraction, but not depth. Success, but not significance. He saw that people were so afraid of confronting themselves, of facing their own inner void, that they invented endless ways to escape. Through work, entertainment, superficial relationships, or blind conformity. He called this the sickness unto death, not a physical illness but a spiritual one. A life lived without authenticity. Unlike other philosophers who tried to systematize truth, Kierkegaard insisted that truth is subjective, not in the sense of being relative, but in being deeply personal. You don't find truth in books or debates. You find it in how you live, in how much of your soul you're willing to face. For him, despair wasn't just a feeling, it was the gap between who we pretend to be and who we really are. And he believed most people live their entire lives in that gap. This insight shook the foundation of Western thought. It wasn't enough to know the truth. You had to live it. Kierkegaard called out what he saw as the great hypocrisy of society. People who claim to believe in something, God, values, purpose, but whose lives were empty of those beliefs in practice. He wasn't afraid to offend. In fact, he believed offense was necessary to wake people up. Comfort, he said, was the enemy of transformation. Kierkegaard warned that the greatest danger of the modern world wasn't evil, it was apathy, the slow death of the soul caused by distraction, routine, and the endless pursuit of things that don't matter. He saw a culture obsessed with appearances, success, and entertainment, but hollow at its core. He described the modern person as tranquilized by the trivial, sleepwalking through life without ever truly living it. This was not just a critique, it was a call to action. Kierkegaard believed that in order to escape this spiritual emptiness, we must first be willing to face it, to stop pretending, to stop running, to descend into the terrifying depths of our own being, and ask the hardest question of all: am I really living my life? Or am I just playing a role? For Kierkegaard, the real tragedy was not death. It was never having lived authentically. His crisis became his awakening, and from that place of honesty, pain, and isolation, he began crafting the philosophy that would inspire generations, a philosophy that doesn't offer easy answers, but demands real confrontation with the truth. Topic 2. Faith, Reason, and the Existential Abyss. After confronting the despair within himself, Kierkegaard realized that the traditional answers offered by philosophy and theology were no longer sufficient. The world around him was changing. Science was rising, religion was becoming institutionalized and hollow, and people were more concerned with fitting in than with becoming whole. In this climate, he saw a terrifying pattern emerging. Reason had replaced faith, but it had not filled the void it left behind. Kierkegaard was not against reason. He was deeply intellectual, well-read, and trained in theology. But he believed that reason had limits, especially when it came to questions of existence. Science could explain how the world worked, but not why life mattered. Philosophy could map out logic, but not help a person face their dread in the middle of the night. He argued that the most important truths, like love, purpose, and God, couldn't be proven. They had to be chosen, with risk, fear, and freedom. This led to one of his most radical ideas, the leap of faith. For Kierkegaard, this wasn't about blindly believing in dogma. It was about facing the abyss, the terrifying possibility that life is meaningless, and choosing to believe anyway. Not out of ignorance, but out of courage. This wasn't an escape from reality. It was a commitment to live with uncertainty, and to create meaning through your own choices. He saw faith as a defiant act of personal authenticity. To explain this, Kierkegaard used a powerful metaphor: standing on the edge of a cliff, looking into a dark, bottomless void. You're paralyzed. Reason tells you to step back, but something in your soul whispers that you must jump, that only by leaping into the unknown can you truly live. That leap, for him, was the essence of faith. It was not the absence of doubt, it was the decision to walk through doubt, to engage it fully, and still move forward. This was his response to the spiritual crisis of modernity. While society was numbing itself with distractions, Kierkegaard urged people to take responsibility for their existence. He saw that freedom is terrifying. It means you can't blame the church, the system, or your parents. Your life is your own. And that truth, while liberating, can also crush you if you're not ready to face it. His critique of organized religion was also groundbreaking. He believed that many churches had become places where people pretended to believe, where rituals were followed without passion, and where God had become a comfortable idea instead of a living presence. He wrote scathing attacks on the Danish Lutheran Church, accusing it of turning Christianity into a lifeless system, divorced from real human struggle. For Kierkegaard, authentic faith had to come from anguish, not from habit. In his writings, he often used pseudonyms, fictional voices that represented different ways of living and thinking. One voice might be a seducer, another a religious seeker, another a philosopher. This technique allowed him to explore the complexity of human experience and avoid preaching. He didn't want to tell you what to think. He wanted to force you to choose, because only in choosing, consciously, painfully, honestly, could a person become real. Kierkegaard's battle wasn't with atheists. It was with people who said they believed in something, but lived like they didn't. He called them out for using religion as a social costume, a way to avoid facing the deep questions of life. He warned that the worst kind of despair is not knowing you're in despair, because then you don't even seek healing. You just drift, comfortably numb, until it's too late. At the heart of all his work was one burning message: you must become yourself. Not the self that society approves of. Not the self that gets applause. The true self, the one hidden beneath layers of fear, masks, and expectations. And to find that self, you have to let go of certainty. You have to walk into the unknown. You have to risk everything. This is why Kierkegaard is considered the father of existentialism. He didn't offer solutions. He offered confrontation. He didn't say, "Here's the meaning of life." He said, "Go find it, and be willing to bleed for it." In a world that increasingly values comfort, clarity, and consensus, his philosophy is more relevant than ever. Topic 3. The 3 stages of life, a path out of emptiness. Kierkegaard believed that most people don't live, they merely exist. And to break free from this numb existence, he introduced one of his most powerful ideas: the 3 stages of life. These aren't rigid categories. They're psychological and spiritual paths that reflect how we relate to meaning, responsibility, and the self, and moving through them is painful, but essential. The first is the aesthetic stage, where most people spend their lives. In this stage, the individual seeks pleasure, beauty, distraction, and novelty. Life is lived on the surface, chasing relationships, achievements, thrills, or art for its own sake. The goal is to avoid boredom and pain. But Kierkegaard warned that this stage, while seductive, always ends in despair. Because eventually, the thrill fades, the mask slips, and the emptiness returns, deeper than before. He portrayed this aesthetic despair through characters like the seducer in either Slash or a man who manipulates love to avoid vulnerability. This character is witty, intelligent, and cultured, yet spiritually dead. Kierkegaard showed that even the most refined pleasures cannot save us from ourselves. The more we chase stimulation to fill the void, the more enslaved we become to our own fear of meaninglessness. The second stage is the ethical stage. Here, the person begins to take responsibility. They recognize that life is not about indulgence, but about commitment to values, to others, to integrity. In this stage, the individual starts asking, "Who am I? What kind of person do I want to become?" It's no longer enough to drift. Now there's a demand to choose consciously and to act with purpose. But Kierkegaard knew this wasn't easy. The ethical life brings moral weight and with it, anxiety. It requires looking at our failures, our compromises, and the masks we've worn. The ethical person tries to live with consistency and truth, but this effort can become unbearable when it clashes with the absurdity and fragility of life. This too can lead to despair, but it's a higher form of despair, one that prepares the soul for something greater. That greater step is the religious stage, the final and most difficult stage. Here, the individual confronts the limits of reason, morality, and human effort. They realize that even the ethical life cannot save them from the paradox of existence, from suffering, loss, and the silence of the universe. In this moment of collapse, Kierkegaard believed, a person is invited to leap into faith, into relationship with the eternal, into authenticity. This is not religious conformity. It's the most radical kind of individuality. It means standing alone before the infinite, surrendering your illusions, and trusting in something beyond logic. It's the opposite of passivity. It requires fierce courage, to believe without evidence, to love without guarantees, to live without masks. The religious stage is where despair becomes transformation. To illustrate this, Kierkegaard wrote Fear and Trembling, using the story of Abraham. God commands Abraham to sacrifice his son, and Abraham obeys, not because it makes sense, but because he trusts. Kierkegaard didn't celebrate blind obedience. He explored the agony of that trust, the paradox of faith. Abraham becomes a knight of faith, not because he is perfect, but because he dares to surrender everything while still believing in love. Kierkegaard believed that only through this kind of leap could one escape the trap of modern life. He saw that most people never even left the aesthetic stage. They simply numbed themselves through comfort, busyness, or social roles. Others tried to be good in the ethical stage, but burned out from carrying the weight of existence alone. Only a few, he said, ever dared to live religiously, not by attending church, but by risking everything for a life of real depth. He warned that society makes it harder to reach the religious stage. Modern life encourages conformity, distraction, and shallow self-esteem. It tells you to be happy, but not deep, to be productive, but not honest, to succeed, but never question the system. Kierkegaard saw that this was not progress. It was a slow spiritual death, disguised as normalcy. And yet, his vision wasn't hopeless. He believed that every person, no matter how lost or afraid, could begin the journey. The stages weren't a hierarchy of worth. They were a map, a way to understand our suffering, our choices, and our potential. The moment you stop running, the moment you sit with your own pain and ask why, you've already begun the transformation. Through these stages, Kierkegaard didn't just expose the emptiness of modern life. He showed us a way out, not through ideology or dogma, but through personal awakening, honest confrontation, and the terrifying beauty of becoming who you truly are. Topic 4. Modern life, lost souls, and the illusion of progress. Kierkegaard saw something in the 1800s that many still can't see today. Modern life, despite its glittering achievements, was spiritually collapsing. Progress had become an idol. People spoke of reason, industry, and success, but their inner lives were hollow. They knew more about machines than about their own souls. They were educated, but not wise. They were busy, but not awake. He called it the age of reflection, a time where everything was analyzed but nothing was truly lived. People had opinions about everything, but commitment to nothing. Passion was mocked, seriousness was dismissed, and irony became a shield to avoid vulnerability. Kierkegaard warned, when a society becomes obsessed with appearances, individuality dies, not by force but by indifference. One of his most haunting insights was about the leveling effect of modern culture. In this new world, radical ideas were diluted into trends. Deep beliefs were replaced by public opinion. The unique individual, full of contradiction, fire, and struggle, was flattened into a type, a social role, a number in a system. People no longer dared to be themselves. They wanted to be liked, accepted, approved. He saw the rise of the press and mass media as particularly dangerous, not because of lies, but because of noise. He wrote that in a truly tyrannical system, at least people know they are being oppressed. But in a world flooded with distractions, people don't even notice they're being erased. They become spectators of life, endlessly watching, scrolling, commenting, but never acting from their true selves. Kierkegaard saw this as a profound form of despair, one worse than pain, the despair of not knowing you are in despair. When you've adapted so deeply to a life that isn't yours, you no longer even feel the ache of missing meaning. You smile, perform, succeed, but inside you're a ghost. This, he said, was the modern sickness, not evil, not suffering, but spiritual anesthesia. He also recognized the crisis of identity that came with modern freedom. In the past, people were told who they were by tradition, religion, or community. But now we are told to define ourselves, to invent meaning, to create a self from scratch. This sounds liberating, but it's terrifying, because with freedom comes responsibility, and that responsibility can crush a person who hasn't yet faced their shadow. Kierkegaard believed that most people don't avoid truth because they're lazy. They avoid it because it's too painful. Facing who you really are means dismantling years of self-protection. It means grieving the life you've been pretending to live. It means rejecting comfort for the sake of honesty. He called this process dying to the self, and said that only by dying in this way could we be reborn into something real. He also foresaw a strange kind of spiritual burnout. In a world of infinite options and constant self-improvement, people would become addicted to becoming, but never arriving. They'd read endless books, chase experiences, set goals, improve their mindset, but never actually live, because they're always seeking something out there, instead of turning inward and embracing who they already are. This is what made Kierkegaard radical. He wasn't asking you to become something new. He was asking you to strip away everything false and return to your essence. And for that, he knew you had to go through darkness. There is no shortcut, no hack, no 5-step plan, only the long, slow descent into your fears, doubts, contradictions, until you meet the self you abandoned long ago. In this way, Kierkegaard offers a brutal gift to the modern world. He tells us the truth, that meaning cannot be downloaded, that peace cannot be bought, and that becoming yourself is the hardest and most urgent task you'll ever face. And the longer you wait, the harder it gets, because the soul doesn't die overnight. It fades little by little until one day you wake up and realize you're no longer there. Yet even in this bleak vision, Kierkegaard left a door open. He believed that even the most lost soul can begin again, the moment they choose to become honest. The moment they stop blaming the world, stop hiding behind noise, and face themselves without flinching. That is the moment life begins, not in comfort, but in truth. Topic 5. How to live authentically in a world that rewards mask. Kierkegaard didn't just diagnose the problem, he gave us the cure. And it begins with one terrifying, liberating idea. You must choose yourself, not the version of you that society applauds, not the one your parents expected, not even the self you fantasized about becoming, but the real you, trembling, flawed, hungry for truth. The self that exists when the noise fades and you're left alone with your soul. He called this radical path authentic existence, a life rooted not in imitation, but in inwardness. Kierkegaard believed that to live authentically, you must face the full weight of your freedom. You must admit that you are not a product of circumstances, but a creator of meaning. That your life is not a script, it's a question. And only you can answer it with your actions, your risks, and your choices. But this isn't romantic. It's terrifying, because the moment you accept that your life is your responsibility, you lose all excuses. You can no longer blame the system, your past, or the people around you. You have to look in the mirror and say, "This is mine. And what I do next, that's on me." Kierkegaard called this anguish the dizziness of freedom. It's the vertigo that comes when you realize you are standing at the edge of possibility. So how do you begin? Kierkegaard's answer was simple, but not easy. You must leap. Not blindly, but with faith. The kind of faith that dares to live without guarantees. You must leap away from the crowd, away from borrowed beliefs, and into a life that feels utterly your own. This is what he meant by the leap of faith. It's not about religion in the traditional sense. It's about risking yourself, fully, vulnerably, in pursuit of a truth that cannot be proven, only lived. To support this leap, Kierkegaard urged us to cultivate silence and solitude. He believed that without time alone, without facing our inner life, we become strangers to ourselves. In a world of endless stimulation, this is more relevant than ever. We scroll to avoid silence. We perform to avoid doubt. We distract to avoid pain. But it's only in that raw stillness that we hear the faint whisper of who we really are. He also spoke of the single individual, the person who stands apart not out of pride but out of necessity. This person is not better than others, but they have stopped outsourcing their life to public opinion. They have chosen the hard path of becoming a subject, someone who lives from the inside out rather than the outside in. and Kierkegaard believed that this was the only way to live truthfully in an untruthful age. He warned, however, that this path is lonely. Authenticity does not come with applause. Often, it brings rejection, confusion, isolation. Because when you stop playing the game, others don't know what to do with you. But this loneliness, Kierkegaard said, is sacred. It's the price of becoming whole. And it's in that solitude that the deepest connections are born, not just with others, but with the eternal. Kierkegaard never pretended this path was easy. He struggled his whole life with doubt, melancholy, and heartbreak. But he believed that these very struggles were signs that you're alive, that you haven't gone numb. He once wrote, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. That's what happens when you betray yourself. You mourn the life you could have lived." So his challenge was this: dare to be yourself, not someday, but now. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for clarity. Begin where you are, with what you have, and start listening to the quiet truth inside you. Because if you don't, someone else will live your life for you, and you'll wake up one day realizing you were never truly here. This is what made Kierkegaard so dangerous, and so necessary. He didn't give people comfort. He gave them mirrors. He asked them to stop running, stop pretending, and start living. Not perfectly, not with all the answers, but with sincerity, courage, and the fierce refusal to settle for a hollow life. The most important battle is the one inside you. Soren Kierkegaard didn't give us answers. He gave us a mirror so honest, so uncomfortable, that most people turn away. Because in that reflection, we see the life we're really living, not the one we post, not the one we promise ourselves, but the one shaped by fear, conformity, and silence. He showed us that despair isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, polite, smiling. It's the slow death of the soul when we trade truth for approval. When we stop asking what we were meant to be, and start asking what others expect us to be. That's the emptiness he exposed. And it's everywhere in modern life. But Kierkegaard didn't stop there. He also showed us the way out: honesty, faith, and the radical courage to live without guarantees. He asked us to become individuals in a world that rewards imitation, to walk alone if necessary, to leap, not because we're sure, but because something in us refuses to die quietly. He knew this path wasn't easy, but he believed it was sacred, because to become yourself, truly, deeply, is the most painful and the most beautiful thing you can do. And if you never try, you'll never know what you could have been. So now, the question isn't what did Kierkegaard believe? It's what will you do with this truth? Have you been wearing a mask for too long? Have you been avoiding your own voice? Have you traded depth for safety? If this video made you feel something, sit with it. Don't scroll away. Don't rush to the next thing. Let it echo. Let it ask you, who are you, really? And if you feel brave, leave a comment sharing one truth about yourself you've been hiding, even if it's just a whisper. That's where transformation begins. If this resonated with you, like the video, subscribe, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next deep dive into the minds that challenge us to live fully. And if you know someone who's lost in noise and ready for truth, share this with them. Because in a world full of distractions, truth is the loudest revolution.